Om Sadashivasamarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmaracharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. Good. Be seated, please. Om. Okay, good. Just wait for everyone to be seated. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma Vitvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Good. Nice to see you all today for our Bhagavad Gita class. And welcome to all of you watching online, many students taking this class remotely. We'll continue our study of chapter 16. We'll begin our recitation with verse 13. Yes? Okay. And as always, when I'm reciting, read the translation and then repeat after me. Idam hadyamaya labdham, idam hadyamaya labdham, imam prapsye manoratham, imam prapsye manoratham, idam hastidam api me, idam hastidam api me, bhavishyati punardhanam, bhavishyati punardhanam, asau maya hatah shatrur, asau maya hatah shatrur, hanishye chaparanapi, hanishye chaparanapi, ishvaro hamaham bhogi, ishvaro hamaham bhogi, siddhoham balavan sukhi, siddhoham balavan sukhi, adhyo bijanavan asmi, adhyo bijanavan asmi, konyosti sadrisho maya, konyosti sadrisho maya, yakshye dasyami modishya, yakshye dasyani Ityajnana vimohitaha, ityajnana vimohitaha, aneka chitta vibhranta, aneka chitta vibhranta, mohajala samavritaha, mohajala samavritaha, prasakta kama bhogeshu, prasakta kama bhogeshu, patanti narakeshu chau, patanti narakeshu chau, atma sambhavita stabdha, atma sambhavita stabdha, dhanamanamadhanvitaha, dhanamanamadhanvitaha, yajante nama yajnaiste, yajante nama yajnaiste, Dambhena vidhipurvakam, Dambhena vidhipurvakam, Ahankaram balam darpam, Ahankaram balam darpam, Kamam krodham cha samshrita, Kamam krodham cha samshrita, Mamatma paradeheshu, Mamatma paradeheshu, Pradvishantobhyasuyakaha, Pradvishantobhyasuyakaha. Very good. So, we finished verse 12. We continue today with verse 13. And in our studies is chapter 16, you recall, Daiva Asura Sampat Vibhaga Yoga. It's a long, complicated title. The meaning is simple. There is a Daiva Sampat, there are divine qualities, and there is an Asura Sampat, so-called demonic qualities. And in this chapter, Shri Krishna does vibhaga. He identifies them separately. And I'll remind you, the reason for this topic is not to be judgmental. Many people have that problem. Oh, he's like this. Oh, she's like that. The fact is, whoever you're referring to is, first of all, so complex. You're pointing out one little feature. Excuse me. When you're saying he's like this and she's like that, you're pointing out one little feature. There's so much more than that. Can I describe you with one word? You are blank. Fill in the blank. One word could never describe you. We are all complex beings, so there's no room for this judgmentalism. As we've discussed, the purpose of this division is to observe our own behaviors and guide our actions towards the divine qualities, because that's what leads us to spiritual growth. As we saw in the last class, the demonic qualities take you downwards, and the divine qualities lead you forward on your path of spiritual growth. Before we begin today, there's a couple of questions. Are these traits strictly mutually exclusive? Or can human beings be a sort of mix between the two? It's a good question, and Sri Krishna never said they are mutually exclusive. And we all know human behavior, as I just said, the complexity of all human behavior. So we can say, without question, every single human being is a combination of these divine traits and these demonic traits. Which means the greatest saints that have ever lived might have some defects, do have some defects. And the most terrible people who ever lived might have some qualities. The Mahabharata is brilliant in in showing the complexity of human behavior, because all the great characters in the Mahabharata have flaws, and all the terrible characters have some qualities. For example, Bhishma was rigid. He was stubborn, and that caused a war. Yudhishthira was addicted to gambling. Son of Dharma, addicted to gambling. Duryodhana, the arch-villain, so to speak, in the whole epic, had a tremendous sense of loyalty and dedication. So that very nicely shows how every human being is a complex combination of these so-called divine and demonic qualities. And that's not surprising, because these divine and demonic qualities are a product of sattva, rajas, and tamas. the three gunas. There was another question about the relationship between these divine and demonic qualities and these three gunas, sattva, rajas. Sattva, principle of purity and balance. Rajas, property of desire, action, passion, extroversion. And tamas, a principle of darkness, of ignorance, of lethargy. So these three gunas are qualities of our minds. And every single person's mind has all three gunas. There's no mind that has only sattva guna, no mind that has only rajoguna, no mind that has only tamo guna. Every single mind has all three, but has all three in different proportions. We discussed this long ago. So it's easy to see that someone whose mind is predominantly sattvic will have more of the divine traits, and someone whose mind is predominantly tamasic will have more of the so-called demonic traits. Okay, with that said, we'll pick up with verse 13. Now I'm smiling because Sri Krishna employs a very dramatic effect here with the coming verses. So far he has been describing the demonic qualities in quite some length. He's gone on for a while, and he's going to go on even longer, but he shifts his approach, and he puts his teachings now in the first person. So he is going to speak as if he were someone with demonic traits. He speaks in the first person. He uses the first person for rhetorical effect. Very powerful, as you'll see as we continue here. Let's see. Idam hadyamaya labdham, idam hadyamaya labdham, imam prapsye manoratham, imam prapsye manoratham, idam hastidam api me, idam hastidam api me, bhavishyati punardhanam, bhavishyati punardhanam. So Sri Krishna speaks and gives you a good, nice expression in gut feeling. We have a nice English expression here. He gives you that gut feeling through these expressions in the first person. He says, the one who has demonic traits will speak like this. Idam labdham, this has been gained. Maya, by me. Adya, right now. Up to now, this much has been obtained by me. And imam manoratham, and these other things that I want, my dreams, my hopes, my aspirations, prapsye, I will fulfill. I will fulfill my remaining desires. May, a third line end, may, for me, idam asti, I have this, idam api, and I have that. I have this, I have that, I have this, I have that. What do we call that? Bragging. He's bragging. I have this, I have that. I have a Tesla, I have a Lexus, I have a Mercedes. You know people who talk like that. And bhavishyati punardhanam, and punardhanam, and further wealth, bhavishyati, I will gain. So further wealth. This is to give us more of a gut feeling, a sense for what these demonic traits are like. So instead of explaining them, he puts them in the mouth of a person with these demonic traits. Let's continue. Asau maya hata shatrur, asau maya hata shatrur, anishye chaparanapi, anishye chaparanapi, ishvaro hamaham bhogi, ishvaro hamaham bhogi, siddhoham balavan sukhi, siddhoham balavan. So this dialogue is taking place on the battlefield. So not surprisingly, we get the reference to a warrior who is speaking here, and that warrior with demonic traits would say, Asau Shatruhu, that enemy, Maya Hataha, was killed by me. I killed that enemy. Cha, in the middle of the next line, Cha, and Aparan, Api, and all these other enemies, Hanishye, I will kill. I have killed so many enemies, and all the enemies that remain, I certainly will kill them. Ishvaraha aham. Now be careful, Ishvaraha is used here in a root meaning, the one who is in charge, the one who is the ruler or Lord is Ishvara. In American English, boss. I am the boss. Ishvaroham, I am the boss. Aham, bhogi, and I enjoy everything. Siddhaha aham, I am highly accomplished. Balavan, I am strong. Sukhi, I am happy. He goes on bragging, and then if you think this is bad, wait till you see the next verse. Adhyo bijanavan asmi, adhyo bijanavan asmi, konyosti sadrsho maya, konyosti sadrsho maya, yakshe dasyami modishya, yakshe dasyami modishya, ityajnana vimohitaha, ityajnana vimohitaha. So he continues. See the asmi at the very end of the first line. I am what? Adhyaha, I am wealthy. Abhijanavan, I come from a good family. Sounds very, we hear that from time to time. And then this very telling statement. Kaha anyaha, who else? Asti is maya sadrishaha, who is like me, who is as good as me, who is as powerful as me, who is as great as me. Kaha anyaha. So this is clearly a statement of this exaggerated pride. And let's pause just for a moment to try to understand that kind of exaggerated pride. I don't think anyone in this room has this kind of pride, so it might be a little hard to understand, and we should and must understand it. Where does this exaggerated pride come from? And it comes from a very surprising source. So someone who wants to demonstrate their greatness. This is not always true. What I'm going to share with you is not always true, but is probably frequently true. Someone who behaves like that is covering up some inner insecurity. Someone who feels completely secure with who they are doesn't need to brag. You won't see that kind of prideful behavior, this kind of exaggerated pride, if someone is comfortable with who they are. I am who I am. Whatever I have is what I have. Someone who is comfortable with who they are, as they are, that person is not going to brag, not going to show off, and is not going to behave with this obnoxious pride. On the other hand, someone who is not comfortable with who they are, in particular, someone who is insecure. Look at the irony. Someone who thinks they're not good enough is the person who's likely to say, I'm the greatest of all. Isn't that ironic? They think they're not good enough in their own view. They're not good enough. So they're saying this not so much to convince others, because to be honest, this kind of prideful person doesn't care what you think, right? Someone with this exaggerated pride could care less what is your opinion. So such exaggerated pride is born not out of a desire to convince you, but out of a desire to convince themselves, to cover up their own insecurity. That's highly revealing. Like I said, I don't know that it's always true, but I think it's often true. When we see the behavior of certain politicians and world leaders and other big figures in the news, you can see elements of that insecurity. And what's absolutely remarkable is that these teachings create that complete self-acceptance. So the point here is, if this exaggerated pride is due to inner insecurity and absence of self-acceptance, these teachings lead to the opposite condition, complete and utter self-acceptance. Why? Because you discover your true self to be Satchidananda Atma, full and complete. And you simultaneously understand that whatever is the condition of your body and mind, whatever is the condition of your life and your net worth, whatever it is, it's all due to the unfoldment of karma. With this understanding, you become absolutely comfortable with who you are. And this is a little bit of a side issue, just something I've observed. When you watch someone's behavior, you can often get a sense of that insecurity. And for example, something that I notice very often is somebody who sits like this. You can't see that on camera. Here, I need to show our friends on camera. Here we go. They sit like this. Now, you don't need to be highly studied in body language to understand that there's some discomfort there. So that discomfort is perhaps a sign of that lack of inner acceptance. On the other hand, you see people who are just comfortable. And to me, that's a sign of inner acceptance. You don't need to be enlightened to accept yourself. You need to be emotionally healthy to accept yourself. And an emotionally healthy person just accepts themselves. Doesn't mean that they don't try to improve themselves, but it means there's no negative judgment. There's positive acceptance, positive regard for oneself. Okay, enough said. Let's come back. Second half. So our arrogant warrior who has so much money, what is he going to do with that money? He says, Yakshye, I will perform rituals. Dasyami, I will perform acts of charity. And modishya, I will enjoy the fruits of my money. So interesting, yakshye, I will use the money that I have. By the way, money that he's probably gained through illicit means. He's going to use that illicitly gained money for the sake of organizing elaborate rituals. In this way, of course, he's thinking that he's going to bribe the gods, would be the attitude of such a person. Let me pay off the gods like you'd pay off a politician. He's going to pay off the gods. Dasyami, he's going to do charity again with illicit money. He's going to buy favors when you give charity. He's not doing it to help others. He's doing it to buy favors, and he enjoys his wealth. Iti, thus, and here's where this passage in the first person comes to an end here. So Sri Krishna, now it's Sri Krishna's own voice, starting with this fourth line. He says, Iti, thus, in this manner, the ones who are ajnana vimohitaha, the ones who are completely overcome by ignorance, delusion, they speak in this way. So Sri Krishna concludes that passage in the first person, giving us a very vivid view of these arrogant, prideful ones with demonic traits. We'll continue. Aneka chitta vibranta, aneka chitta vibranta, moha jala samavritaha, moha jala samavritaha, prasakta kama bhogeshu, prasakta kama bhogeshu, patanti narakeshu chau, patanti narakeshu chau. Start with the third line. It'll help make sense of this verse. Those with demonic traits are prasaktaha. They are deeply attached. Attached to what? Kama bhogeshu. They're attached to the bhoga, the enjoyment of kama, the things they enjoy. They are attached to enjoyments. They're attached to fulfilling their desires. How many desires? That's interesting. So if you have thousands of desires, as these people will have thousands of desires, now there's a new problem. Which desire to fulfill first of all those desires? And for that reason, in the first line, Sri Krishna says, Aneka chitta vibrantaha. They are vibranta. They are confused by aneka chitta, by so many thoughts, and now we'll refine the translation, by so many desires. They're overwhelmed by having thousands and thousands of desires. Here's a very kind of an obvious example. Someone who is very simple tastes, as they say, someone who has very simple tastes has fewer desires and therefore is more content. Someone who has very high expectations, has very, very, what do they say, expensive tastes, has very many desires. Tell me, that person will be more content or less content than the simple person of simple tastes? You get, it's obvious, right? So here we're seeing the extreme. Sri Krishna is giving us this very extreme example of those who have thousands of desires and their minds are overwhelmed by all those desires. They are moha jala samavritaha. They are samavritaha. They are surrounded by moha jala, by a web of delusion. Of course, that web is our own thoughts. We all know what it's like to be caught up in our own thoughts. Here, the thoughts aren't just ordinary thoughts. The thoughts are thousands of desires. So they are caught up in this web of desire, and they are confused by the many desires, and as a result of being caught in that web of desire, and for all the prior reasons, Sri Krishna says, patanti, they fall. Narake ashuchau, they fall into hells. They fall into hell, ashuchau, impure hell. Now, what does it mean to fall into hell? There are two meanings. The obvious one is this person will have committed many, many papa karmas, sins in their lifetime. So after the death in this life, they would then be in a position to receive the consequences of all those papa karmas they've accrued, and they would fall into some hellish situation. By the way, it's worth knowing that according to the doctrine of karma, heaven and hell are not described as places. Heaven and hell are better understood as experiences. And we could say a lifetime of experience. A lifetime in which you experience no suffering and only pleasure for an entire lifetime, we call that Swarga, heaven. Not a place, a lifetime of experience. In the same way, a lifetime of suffering, uninterrupted suffering, that's how we understand Naraka, hell. So a lifetime of pleasure, lifetime of suffering, not a particular place. So they could be, I don't know if cockroaches suffer, but to be reborn as a cockroach, not just a cockroach, a hungry, malnourished cockroach. There has to be suffering, right? I would imagine cockroaches who have enough food, they might be happy. Who knows, right? Why not? A happy cockroach and a hungry cockroach. So the point is suffering. So life as a cockroach, you cannot say is heaven or hell. It depends on whether or not the cockroach, what a silly discussion. It depends on whether or not the cockroach is suffering. Okay, you got the idea. Here's the point, though. It means since heaven and hell are not a particular place, but rather a lifetime of pure enjoyment or pure suffering, then heaven or hell could be anywhere, including here. Of course, it's not likely that you can live a life of pure pleasure with no suffering as a human being. So I don't think Swarga can be realized in a human life. Doesn't seem likely. In the same way, I don't think hell can be realized in a human life, because it would mean a life of pure suffering, not even a moment of pleasure. And I think that's unlikely in a human condition, to have a life in which there is not a shred of happiness. My Parama Guru, Swami Chinmayananda, liked to make the observation that in the worst slum you can go into, whether it's Dharavi or in South America or wherever it is, that in the worst slum you hear laughter. That's true. So even in terrible situations, people still find moments of pleasure. So heaven and hell are not locations, they're not places. Heaven is a life of pure enjoyment. Hell is a life of pure suffering. But according to the doctrine of karma, that heaven and hell come to an end. They are the product of prarabdha karma, a finite amount of karma. So when you've enjoyed all your good karmas, your life of pure pleasure comes to an end. And when you've suffered, when you've exhausted all your so-called bad karmas, papa karmas, then your life of suffering comes to an end. So that's the sense of Naraka and Swarga, heaven and hell. But just a further note before we go on here, and that is the consequences of these demonic qualities. I shouldn't call them qualities, traits. The consequences of these demonic traits also happen in this life. Someone with these demonic traits, you could argue, probably gains more power and wealth than others. I think that's probably the case. Someone who has this very exaggerated set of traits, these demonic traits, is so arrogant and so forceful, so aggressive in their thinking and behavior, they probably push their way ahead. You know, the people who push their way in a line, they want to push their way to the front of the line. So, or the ones who climb the corporate ladder by climbing over the backs of others, right? That kind of sense. So these people with these exaggerated demonic traits would probably fall into those categories, resulting in more power and wealth in this lifetime. I think that's likely. But tell me, is the goal of life power and wealth, or is the goal of life happiness and contentment? Pretty obvious, right? So the power and wealth are for the sake of happiness and contentment. But tell me, do you think those with demonic traits, they may get the power and wealth? I don't think they're going to get the happiness and contentment. In fact, having thousands of desires is a formula for being discontent. You won't be content until you satisfy thousands of desires. So they may gain wealth and power in this lifetime. They won't gain happiness and contentment, which means they suffer in this life already. You suffer now if you, for someone who has these demonic traits, they suffer the consequences now and later. Both now and later. All right, continuing. Atma sambhavita stabdha, Atma sambhavita stabdha, dhanamanamadhanvitaha, dhanamanamadhanvitaha, yajante nama yajnaiste, yajante nama yajnaiste, dambhena vidhipurvakam, dambhena vidhipurvakam. So Sri Krishna is finally winding down. We have one verse, two more verses, where he continues. He calls these people stabdaha. They are stubborn. They are atma sambhavitaha. They think highly of themselves. Remember, we said highly of themselves and lowly of everyone else. That's implied. If someone says, I'm great and so are you, wonderful. But that's not what's being described here. I am great and you are useless, is what's described here. So these people further are dhana mana mada anvitaha. They are anvita, they're full of mada, this pride, this arrogance, and dhana mana, they're proud of their wealth. They have this pride of wealth. They have so much wealth and they're proud of it. They're showing off. Not just one Tesla. Why not 2, 3, or whatever is the car? Anyway. And what, by the way, if you have a Tesla, good. You know, nothing wrong. Nothing wrong. I don't feel judgmental. That's not my point. Okay, nothing wrong. If you like a Tesla, buy 2 or 3. All right. What about these ones? Yajante, they worship. They do worship. Remember in ancient culture, these ones with so much of the demonic traits, they want to appear as the epitome of their societies, the highest in their society. In ancient times, to be at the top, so to speak, means you're the one who does the most elaborate rituals. We don't have that thinking today, but in ancient times, whoever has the resources to do a big ritual means you have to hire many priests. You have to buy many substances and things that are involved in the ritual. So those who can afford to organize the most elaborate rituals, those are the ones most highly regarded in the community. So these, with these demonic traits, will also want to perform these rituals. For what purpose? So this is the key. What is the purpose for doing that ritual? And Sri Krishna here says that they do these rituals, yajante, they worship nama yajnaihi te. Te, they perform these rituals. Nama yajnaihi, they do the worship in name only. They're just doing the actions, which means they're just buying the priests. And perhaps they sit as yajamana, as the worshiper, doing what the priest tells them what to do. But as they're doing all of this in the ritual, they're just doing it mechanically. It's not done as an act of praise and love and reverence. It's done mechanically. It's done dambhena. It's done as a pretense. They're trying to look pious. They're trying to occupy that high place in society. And further, everything they're doing is avidhi purvakam. It's not done properly. So I jokingly referred to before that the money that they use to pay the priests receive as dakshina. Dakshina is the money a priest receives for doing a ritual. And that dakshina given by these arrogant ones, that dakshina was earned how? Through illicit means. And that's what Sri Krishna is referring to here. Okay, last verse in the sequence. Ahankaram balam darpam. Ahankaram balam darpam. Kamam krodham cha samshritaha. Kamam krodham cha samshritaha. Mamatma paradeheshu. Mamatma paradeheshu. Pradvishantobhyasuyakaha. Pradvishantobhyasuyakaha. So he concludes that these people are, end of the second line, samshritaha. They resort to, this is the Sanskrit kind of language, they resort to what? Ahankara, ego, pride. They resort to balam, strength, forcefulness, aggressiveness. They resort to darpam, arrogance, pride. They resort to kamam, desire, krodham, anger. And finally, Sri Krishna says, mam, me, paradeheshu, abiding in other beings, pradvishantaha, they are hateful. These people are hateful towards my presence in other beings. Why? They are abhyasuyakaha. They are jealous. And this needs a little bit of explanation. Imagine this prideful, arrogant person who Sri Krishna has been so elaborately and vividly describing. Imagine that person meeting a simple sadhu. A sadhu who wears tattered clothes, a sadhu who only thing he owns is the clothes and he has his kamandalu, his begging bowl. And the sadhu lives just by going and begging at various homes. He gets food. The sadhu is absolutely content. And one of the reasons the sadhu is, in fact, the main reason the sadhu is so content is this sadhu has discovered one's true self to be Satchidananda Atma, or in other words, has discovered the inner divinity. So the sadhu is completely content, having discover that inner divinity, remember earlier in the text, Sri Krishna says, I am that inner divinity dwelling within each person. Of course, he's speaking not as an avatara or even as Sri Krishna, as Arjuna's charioteer. He's speaking as Ishvara from that perspective. So from that perspective, Sri Krishna says, I am that inner divinity dwelling in each person, which allows that person to be completely content. I can imagine these two people meeting, this simple sadhu. Oh, actually, in Bhartrahari's Vairagya Shataka, this famous poet, wrote these famous 100 verses on Vairagya. And one of the chapters is based on a dialogue between a wealthy king and a simple sadhu. And the simple sadhu says, you have these, you sit on a throne, I sit on the ground. You have these silken clothes, I have these tattered robes. And the sadhu says, but who has more happiness and contentment? And this is what Sri Krishna is referring to here. And that is the person who has so much wealth, so much power, so much pride and arrogance, so much regard, being very high in their society, the one who does the most rituals and all of that. The person, that such a person can look at you or me and see that we have so much more contentment that they have. And seeing so much contentment in another, how would that person feel? Jealous. Abhyasuyakaha. They are full of jealousy. And dvashantaha. They feel hateful because you have something they can't buy. With all their power and wealth, and you've heard the statement how many times, you can't buy happiness, you can't buy contentment, you can't buy love. All the things we cherish most in life cannot be conquered through power, cannot be purchased through wealth. Yet, the tools at this person's disposal are power and wealth. And all of that power and wealth is useless in gaining perfect contentment and peace. And seeing that contentment and peace in others, this person feels jealous and angry. And with these words, Sri Krishna concludes his long, notice, He gave the Daiva Sampat in 3 verses. He gave this Asura Sampat in many, many more verses. And the reason is clear. These are the things we need to be alert to. Any trace of these demonic traits that we find in our own thinking, in our own feeling, in our own behavior, if we see even a little bit of these traits, that means we have something that we need to pay attention to. Some problem that needs to be addressed. That's the purpose of all this. Then, next topic is what are the consequences of all of these so-called demonic traits? Sri Krishna talks about the consequences. Tanaham dvishata kruran, tanaham dvishata kruran, samsareshu naradhamam, samsareshu naradhaman, kshipyam yajasramashubhan, Kshipam yajasrama shubhan asurishveva yonishu asurishveva yonishu. Tan, those who are who? Dvishataha, hateful. Those who are kruran, those who are cruel. Those who are nara adhaman, the lowest people, samsareshu, in the whole world. The lowest men that can be found in the world. What about them? Sri Krishna says, you see aham in the first line? Tan aham. Aham is the pronoun I. Aham, now third line. Aham kshipami. I literally throw. I throw them. I throw them. You translate them. I cast them. I send them. Where? Into asurishu eva yonishu. Yoni means womb, and he's referring to rebirth. So I throw them into wombs in their next life or next lives, wombs that are asurishu, that are demonic. So the demonic traits that were present in this life are carried along into the next life by being born. To be born into a demonic womb would mean, in fact, in modern times, to be born to a mother addicted to crack cocaine. That would probably qualify. And what's interesting about that metaphor is that the mother's crack use actually causes harm to the fetus. So not only is this child going to be raised by a defective mother, but this child will be born defective because of mother's crack use. So this would be a good example of someone who was born into a demonic womb, as this would be translated. Please don't make a judgment here that all children born to crack addicts are born such because they were demonic in their prior lives. That would be a horrible misinterpretation of the doctrine of karma. How do you know? We have no way of knowing. Might have been a saint in his prior life. That's not what Sri Krishna is saying here. He's not saying that everyone born in a lowly womb, let us use that term. In fact, he uses a term in the second line, ashubhan, an inauspicious womb. That's a good term. So, did Sri Krishna say in this? This is a rhetorical question. In this verse, did Sri Krishna say that everyone born in an inauspicious womb was born such because they had demonic qualities in a prior life? Is that what's being said here? Not at all. So there are many, many reasons for the circumstances of one's birth. I'm being a little emphatic here because this is one of the, any religious doctrine is subject to abuse. And this particular aspect of the doctrine of karma is really subject to abuse. You look at someone who's really, in your eyes, somehow someone who's lowly, the crack addict mother or the child of that crack addict mother, and you make a conclusion, they must have been really sinful in their prior lives. This is pure judgment, negative judgment, unwarranted judgment, and it's not based on the doctrine of karma. It's based on a misinterpretation of the doctrine of karma. So for any birth, there are so many factors involved, and there's no way for us as human beings to know what those factors are. Therefore, we should refrain from making such judgments. So to be a crack addict is terrible. What suffering! And we had talked about this in our meditation session. The mother who is a crack addict is still a divine manifestation. Then you say, how did she get involved with all this crack then? She made some mistakes with terrible consequences. Did you ever make a mistake? Did I ever make a mistake? Guaranteed. Some mistakes have bigger consequences than others. So she made some mistakes, and it had those consequences. She ends up as a crack addict. So I think I'm getting off the track here, but making a very important point about withholding these negative judgments. No one wants to be a crack addict, right? It's a life of suffering. In fact, psychologists tell us that most addictions are driven by the need to avoid emotional pain. Not all addictions, but most addictions, addictive behavior. That would include alcohol. In fact, they call it, in a perverse way, they call it self-medication. If you feel so bad, you need something to take that pain away. What can take that pain away? Drinking enough alcohol can take the pain away. Crack can perhaps take that pain away. So it is a misguided attempt to lessen one's suffering. Do such people deserve negative judgments? Many people have terrible judgments against people who have alcohol addictions and drug addictions. But why are they addicted? If they were emotionally healthy, if they had good, healthy lifestyles, chances are that addiction would never have taken place. Turns out many people who are addicted to alcohol or drugs are addicted in part because one of their parents were addicted. The point I'm making is no one chooses to be addicted to drugs or alcohol. These addictions are probably a misguided attempt at self-medication to lessen their own suffering. And if they're acting to lessen their own suffering, do they deserve such negative judgments? You get my point here. Okay. So here, all of this is based on Sri Krishna is casting them into the so-called demonic wombs, asurishu, yonishu. They are suffering the consequences. So the point here is if you behave in harmful ways in this life, and if you have enough money and power to avoid most of the suffering in this life, you can avoid some of the consequences of your sinful behavior in this life, but those consequences will catch up to you, so to speak, in a future life. So that is what Sri Krishna is teaching here. He says, I send them, ajasram. Actually, not quickly is not the best translation here. Constantly, again and again and again. Those who behave in sinful ways, they suffer the consequences, in fact, both. And just to conclude our class today, a life of harmful behavior, a life driven by these so-called demonic traits, will result in suffering now, in this life, and suffering further consequences in the next life. So what do they say? A lose-lose proposition. You suffer now and you suffer later. Okay. I think this is a good place to stop. There's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll finish this chapter in next week's class. Brief announcements. Tomorrow, Sunday, we have our Vedanta class. At 10 o'clock, we're starting a new chapter. So if you'd like to join us, it's a good time to come. It's Shankara's Upadesha Sahasri is a brilliant text. And then immediately after class is satsang at 11 o'clock. So please join us tomorrow. We'll conclude with our brief prayers at the altar. Om Gananahan Tva Ganapatigam Avamahe Gavin Gavinam Upamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspataha Shrinvan Utabasira Saranam Om Mahaganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gururhatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshina Murtaye Namaha Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramhanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadguru. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.